Our guest today is a writer of movies, television, and comic books. He was one of the writers for Masters of the Universe Revolution, which is streaming on Netflix now. But what I want to talk to him about today is the six-issue miniseries that he's working on at DC Comics, Alan Scott, The Green Lantern. Issues 1 through 4 are available now, and issues 5 and 6 are currently scheduled for release in March. Mr. Tim Sheridan, welcome, sir. How are you?
Rob, I'm doing great. Thank you so much for having me.
Oh gosh. Thank you for being here. Good Lord. Okay, let's jump right in if we can. Uh, Alan Scott, The Green Lantern. Now, I know that this series is running parallel with a couple of other different miniseries that are going on. We got Wesley Dodds, The Sandman, and we got The Flash, Jay Garrick. How did you get involved with this project? Did somebody pitch it to you? How'd you get involved?
So I worked on a book called Flashpoint Beyond with Jeremy Adams and Jeff Johns, and it's the first time I ever met Jeff Johns and worked with him. And we all really hit it off and had a great time. And that book introduced some principles that Jeff was sort of laying out there in the universe for an idea he had for the new Golden Age,
Okay.
some a new look at some Golden Age characters. And so that kind of opened the door. And then Jeff called me up one day and said, I'm thinking we're going to do these new Golden Age books. I really think you've got an Alan Scott story in you.
Mhm.
Think about it. Let's talk about kind of what I'm doing and what you might do. And I
Okay.
was like, huh. And I thought about it and I said, yeah, I think we could do so, especially considering where Alan Scott was in the DCU, what the information that he had come out of the closet, but they really hadn't done a story about what that meant for
Right.
him as a closeted guy in the 30s and 40s
Hmm.
specifically. And then Jeff introduced this idea of the Red Lantern, the classic arch nemesis, the Golden Age Red Lantern. And once we started riffing on that, the whole thing locked in, and I said, "Yeah, sign me up. Let's do it."
So did you have to do? Alan Scott's been around. The original Green Lantern character has been around forever since he's almost as been around as long as Superman and Batman. I mean, did you have to do any research on Alan Scott? I mean, did you have to go back
Yeah,
and?
I certainly did. I didn't grow up with Alan Scott being a major presence in my life. It wasn't like Alan Scott had a title. He hasn't. This is the first title that Alan Scott's had, really,
Right.
solo in 75 years or so. And
Wow.
but he was around. I was a DC kid. I read a lot of DC comics and that was my world. But I only knew Alan as sort of this strange Green Lantern who dressed weird and like
Yeah.
I was kind of always in the background and I didn't really understand. I didn't put it together. I knew Hal Jordan from like cartoons and stuff, I think.
Naturally.
And yeah, so yeah, I had to do some research. I as I got older, I knew more about who Alan Scott was and I
Yeah.
understood the different versions of sort of where he existed in the DC canon.
Well, the
Um,
original, I mean, they had originally established that he was going to be a gay man in I think 2012 and like an Earth 2 book
In
for
the
the
Earth 2 book, yeah, they introduced that idea and then they ended up, I think, I don't know. I've never talked to the editors about this. I never talked to James Tynion about it, but like I think the idea must have been, I mean, at least from my perspective, it would have been, well, if he was a gay man in on Earth 2,
Mhm.
then have we ever seen a situation where somebody in a different part of the multiverse had a different sexual orientation
Right.
or and so it opened up at least I guess the possibility that, well, no, maybe here in the in the prime in on prime Earth, he was a closeted gay man, and let's explore that story, which is what they wanted to do. But then nobody really, there wasn't really an initiative to like tell that story, to get that book made
There wasn't
for a few
an
years.
initiative to it.
Well, I just don't, there wasn't any
It
attempt, I
wasn't a
don't believe.
priority.
Say again.
It wasn't a priority. Sorry.
I don't know. I have no idea. I
Okay.
just know that no one made the book.
Well,
Like it
yeah.
wasn't, it didn't happen. So it until we made it.
Yeah.
So, but that was a few years,
Hmm.
where we kind of introduced this information and then it was kind of, sort of lingering out there. And I think there were a lot of people who said, well, if we're going to learn this bombshell information about this classic character that we've had around for, 80, 75, 80 years, let's hear the story, you know?
Absolutely. Absolutely.
it's been a real privilege to get to go back and tell it.
And it's such a powerful story, and there's so many powerful character moments, not just for Alan Scott, but for the people around him. And what I remember saying in one of my videos is that it made it easy for me as a straight cisgendered man to identify with this person, who was, I guess, struggling with his identity, his sexual identity in the 30s and 40s. I mean, it's a really powerful connection that you make with the audience. And I guess probably if I could condense the whole interview down to one question, Mr. Sheridan, I guess I would ask you, how did you do that? How did
Uh,
you make such a strong connection between Alan Scott and the audience to the point where I guess people who haven't experienced what he's experiencing can understand it, or at least understand it on some level?
well, I hope that that's the case for a lot of readers. Really, when I heard you say that, by the way, and it certainly made me very happy because
Mhm.
that was the goal. That is the idea for me. um, Storytelling is a tool that we have at our disposal and that we use to, I think, make ourselves better, make our world and our community better. And the way that works, I've always thought, is we have to tell each other our stories and we have to listen to each other's stories. And when we listen, hopefully, we listen for the similarities, we listen for the sames and not the differences.
Mhm.
And we see where we can identify with people that on the surface we might think we don't identify with. And so for me, that is essential, in terms of certainly introducing a version of Alan Scott's story that tells you, that he was a character who on the surface, a lot of folks might read and think, oh, I don't identify with this guy. The
Mhm.
trick, I wish I could tell you what the magic trick is. The trick
That's what
is
I'm
to
looking for, man.
the trick is to try and get people to relate on a level that doesn't have anything to do with the particulars of what it means necessarily to
Mhm.
be a gay man. Although there are a lot of those in this story.
Mhm.
Certainly being a gay man in the 30s and 40s, what is that? What are the particulars of that? Those are kind of a little bit of that's very horrific. Some of that
Yeah.
in the beginning of this story is meant to show you the horrors of what he was facing, what he was up against,
We
and what we as a community, what we as queer people have sort of been up against, and that we're still up against in many parts of the world today.
It's
Um,
issue
but
number
the idea is
two,
to,
I
yeah,
assume is what you mean, Laura. Issue number two, where we
well,
see
in
Alan. I mean, I don't want to go to spoilers, but
yeah,
we go to I guess an asylum, so to
yeah.
speak, and we see, like you said, the horrors that are going on there.
In particular, I think there are horrors in in issue 1, 2, and
Oh yeah.
3. But yes, that's certainly the most extreme, I think, example that's easy to point to. And a lot of what's happening in that issue in issue 2 is still happening today. It's not. I've seen a lot of people say, "Oh, it's so interesting to learn about our history," and I want to
Yeah.
scream. I'm like, I'm telling you about our present. You know,
Yeah.
and if nothing else, I'm telling you what about the experience of what it is to be a queer person, today. And so hopefully people will identify with, the feelings that Alan is feeling. You know, that's the way we connect. Like
Mhm.
I wrote a movie called Superman Man of Tomorrow, and I didn't tell anybody when I was writing it, but I wrote it essentially as a coming out story.
Mhm.
It's not about him being gay. It's about him coming out of the closet as an alien
Right.
to the world. And he's struggling with that because he thinks the world is going to hate me if they know who I really am. And that was me drawing upon my own experience being a closeted gay kid in the 90s in Central Florida and, all the feelings I felt. And if I could communicate those feelings in that Superman story, people watch that movie and they identify with it either because they're a closeted queer person or because they see an immigration allegory, like I'm from another place and
Mhm.
I'm afraid to talk about it because I'm afraid that people will alienate me. um or people who exist in different places on the social spectrum, things like that.
Yeah.
Anything that we sort of can hide away about ourselves. You know, people could identify with that. And I think that's the me. If there is a magic trick, that's what it is. It's what I clumsily one time in an interview called it like reverse coding, where
Okay.
this idea that coding was a way that we sort of could identify each other in the queer community. And then it
Mhm.
became a way that people could identify queer people and and then but now I think we if we can use that idea to broaden the um the horizons and broaden people's understanding of a character by coding it a little bit ambiguously so that
Mhm.
everyone can sort of see themselves in a character. That to me is that's the goal. That's what I try to do. If I'm writing a like this book, a lot of people will say, "Oh, this is a book for queer people, an Alan Scott book
Mhm.
that's, you know, for
Yeah.
the LGBTQIA plus community." It certainly appeals to people in my
It,
community,
it's
but
not for them.
it's not for them, but it's for everyone. Comics are for everyone. And I
Yes.
think the reason I say that is because you don't just pick, please don't just pick up comic books because you personally identify with the character, the main characters of the story. In fact, if anything, pick up the ones that you don't identify with. And maybe you'll find that there is something in there that speaks to you. And you think, gosh, maybe we're not all that different. And I'm here to
Mm.
tell you, we're not. We're
Imagine
just
that.
not.
Imagine that. Now, I mean, um, you're an out member of the LGBTQIA plus community, yes.
Yes,
Um, now, I've is it true that this is the first gay lead character that you've written?
I think so. I said that and I'm like, I've been racking my brain thinking, did it, has it? No, I think it is. I mean, really, certainly in terms of a lead character, yes. And a story that is very much rooted in queer history and queer sensibility and the feelings of,
Mhm.
you know, what it is to be in our community
So
from
I
my
mean,
perspective.
with that in mind, I mean, I'm of the school of thought that writers always put at least a little bit of themselves into every story that they write. How much of yourself did you put into this story? How much of this, how much of Tim Sheridan are we seeing on the page here, as opposed to, well, how much of you are we seeing here?
It's such a dangerous question nowadays.
Right.
And the reason
Yeah.
is because there is this vocal, you know, group out there who will use the term self-insert. It's a
Mm.
self-insert, and the writer is just trying to insert themselves into this universe.
Hmm.
And that is such a red herring, weird bait and switch kind of argument. Like, I think for writing to work, for stories to work, I just can't imagine that there's a writer who doesn't write themselves, that write from their perspective, who doesn't, if it's not from your perspective and you're not in actively involved in the story on an emotional level,
Right.
it's going to be terrible. The
Yeah.
way this works is if you're honest.
Hmm.
People understand and can sniff out dishonesty in a story. And I think the more honest we are, the more people relate to, and even if it's something they didn't think they could relate to, you will relate to it. And so for me, in order for it to be honest, I have to be, you know, there. I mean, I'm playing every character essentially. I'm, you know, for me, I went to drama school. And
Really?
so I studied acting. And that was so for me, when I get into the dialogue, and by the way, the reason I did that was because I was a kid. You can see behind me, I was a kid who played with action figures as a kid. And I was telling stories, making up
Yeah.
stories with these characters, you know, every day. And so then I went into theater because I thought, okay, I'm trying to put these characters together and tell stories. And then it occurred to me that, oh, I'm a writer actually, because what I'm
Yeah.
trying to do is tell the story, not just be the mouthpiece for the story, but be the originator of it.
I didn't
And
know that you had a drama background. Where did you go to school, if I can ask?
I went to Florida State University at a time when the School of Theater there was like a conservatory in the middle of this university. It was an
Okay.
incredible school for theater at the time, and I had a fantastic education, uh, and I loved it. But my first, you know, my maybe my favorite class that I had was a play analysis class where we
Play
studied,
analysis class.
yeah, where we studied Aristotle's Poetics
Oh,
and
geez.
the the founding, or the foundational elements of storytelling. And that opened up a whole new world to me. There were things that as an actor in that class, I was like, well, that none of this is accessible to me as an actor. Like all
Right.
these things are great, but I can't do the things that it's saying to do to tell a story. That's what the writer does.
Yeah,
So
exactly.
it opened up my eyes to the fact that, well, but there is a job I could do where I can use these tools to tell stories.
So you kind of segued your drama background. I'm jumping around, forgive me, but into a writing career.
I think I was always writing. I just never thought I could do it as a career.
Hmm.
And I unfortunately I had a lot of people telling me I was a good actor. So I was like, oh, I'm going to be an actor. So I went, I wish they'd told me I was terrible because it would have been
Oh,
great.
gee.
I would have figured it out earlier. And
No,
then
no, no.
I I got out in the world and I just couldn't really make sense out of the career of being a professional actor. And by the way, one of the great uh disadvantages of working in comics is that for me is that I love actors so much. So when
Hmm.
I work in TV and movies, you know, I think actors bring, so much dimension and depth to words that I think are okay for that I wrote on the page, but when the right actor speaks the right words, those become magic words. They're
Hmm.
casting a spell, and it's a spell they cast over the audience, and that's something that I don't think you do in the same way in comics, and I miss it.
No.
When I'm writing comics, I miss, I hear like when I write a Masters of the Universe comic with Eva
Hmm.
Lynn, I hear Lena Headey's voice
I was
as
gonna
Eva Lynn.
say, do you hear certain actors when you're
I
working?
I do, but there's no way that everybody's going to be able to hear that, and I would much rather they just hear her do it, which is
Hmm.
why they, hopefully they watch Masters of the Universe Revelation and Revolution on Netflix and
There you go.
get to hear her do it, because when it's just the words on the page, it's still missing a little for me as a theater kid. It's still missing that extra element of spectacle that and depth that an actor brings to it.
Definitely, definitely. I mean, an odd question here a little bit, but getting back to Alan Scott, why is this story important? Why is it important for comic book readers to, I guess, give this book a chance and give it a chance and kind of dive in a little bit? Why is this
There,
story important? At
there
least
are
to you, sir.
yeah, there are a few ways to answer that, because I think it's important on a, if you love comics
Mm-hmm.
and if you're not really well versed on golden age characters who, this entire industry it was built around,
Yes.
then the new golden age, in particular, these books give you an opportunity to sort of discover, if not rediscover, these great classic characters upon which these long running mythology stories and mythologies that we've been telling for 100 years or so
Mm-hmm.
are based around. So it's important, if you love comics and you really want to learn about the golden age.
Mm-hmm.
um but so that's on a sort of surface level. On
Yeah.
another level, this story is for, it's a story about a man whose secret identity has a secret identity,
Mm-hmm.
who is coming out of the darkness into the light,
Mm-hmm.
and then, as we know, because we know the great history of Alan Scott and the DCU, he will become a shining beacon of that light for the world, for the multiverse. um and so for me, why is it important? It's important because when you read Alan Scott's origin story in All American 16 or Secret Origins 18, you know there are a lot of layers that are not necessarily there. You can read between the lines if you
Mm-hmm.
want. But
Yeah.
what we have an opportunity to do with this book is to fill in some of the blanks, to through a modern lens, and I mean a modern storytelling lens too, really get deeper into the characters, and what makes them tick, and what connections there are that we can make to current world and current comics and current continuity that we saw sort of seeded in the golden age. That's kind of what I try to do. If you read this book is very much rooted in golden age Alan Scott Green Lantern. It's
Definitely.
I'm not rewriting his
No.
story. In fact, there was a story that just came out about how I added this time travel ability and time manipulation to Alan Scott. And I was like, do your research. Like, this is actually something
Yeah.
that he always had. Maybe a lot of writers didn't use it. It wasn't part of his story a lot, but it's something they always talked about. So it's weird to say I'm not adding anything to the lore of,
Well,
but
you're
in
adding
many
something,
ways,
believe me.
well, in many ways, I didn't want to upend the apple cart on this. I'm like,
Mhm.
I want to just retell the story with more layers based on the stuff that DC handed us about this character recently and things that we know are coming for the character down the road and in the canon. And
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 it
and through
fits.
character, through character and through the feelings and emotions of the guy, get to know him more than you would get to know him if you read All American 16, which
Absolutely.
by design is, kind of, it's a superhero story for kids. And it's like, although it has a lot of dark elements to it,
Yeah,
um,
true.
you know, it's,
True.
it's still, there's a surface level to Golden Age comics that we get the luxury now of going in and filling in extra layers beneath the surface to
You get to go
retell
back
the
and add those
stories.
layers.
Yeah, so
Absolutely.
that's what's exciting about it. That's why I think people should read it. I think it makes an argument for why we should revisit these, important eras in the
Hmm.
history of the canon,
Yeah,
and maybe explore these characters from new angles in the
definitely.
stories that we told. I'd love to see them do, a JSA book in the 40s, them in World War II,
I
them
would
in the
too.
50s,
I would too.
like.
I think I've said that. I don't know why they don't do well. We're not
Well,
here.
I mean, there's a million reasons why things happen and don't happen, but
Yeah, yeah.
just as a fan, I would love to see that kind of thing because I think there's a lot of depth and interesting stuff you could do and add to those stories. Mm.
Definitely, definitely. Now, on the subject of, I guess, adding layers and more stories, hypothetically, if somebody at DC comes to you and says, "Hey, we liked this Alan Scott the Green Lantern story. Have you got another one in yet?" What's your answer to that?
Yeah, I mean, it's the tough. That's a tough one to answer because this was conceived as 6 issues,
Yeah.
one story with a beginning, middle, and an end that points to, the future. And in a lot of ways, it's sort of me and the team resetting the toys, and
Hmm.
for someone else to come in and tell some stories too from their
Yeah.
perspective. So in some ways for me, personally, I feel like the assignment was to six and out. Like,
Yeah.
let me do it and leave it for the next guy. Um, so in that respect, it would feel strange to do more. By the way, nobody's asked me to do more, so I
Well,
don't at this point, like that's not even on the table. But
I say
if it
I'm
were to
asking you to
happen,
do more.
if it were to happen, if they were to ask me to do it, it would be a really tough decision because I feel like
Hmm.
I've said what I need to say and what I wanted to say. And
Right.
are there stories that I'm burning to tell? Yes, but
Hmm.
I wouldn't want it to take away from the story that we're telling now.
That you just, yeah. Okay.
So maybe, I guess, maybe, but
Okay. All right. Hey,
you know,
maybe it's better than a no from my perspective. So hey, I'm good. Um, real quick, is it true that you donated all of your residuals from the first issue to the Elton John AIDS Foundation?
yeah, all of my royalties for the 6 issues.
The entire series.
Yeah, I'm donating to the Elton John AIDS Foundation, which is just my charity of choice. It's been my
Hmm.
charity of choice for a long time. I just love their work. I've, always been a big fan of Elton John, but
Hmm.
especially with the kind of work that he's done, the charitable work he's done that made him Sir Elton John.
There you
Um,
go.
and so yeah, so that was important to me because I came out in the beginning and said, hey guys, get out there and buy this book. And I don't want people to think I'm saying, please, please buy the book because I want to
Hmm.
line my pockets. Like
Yeah.
that's not why. I want people to buy the book because I want it in as many hands of as many readers as it can get into.
Yes.
Because I want to tell this story and I don't want to, I don't want to shout it into an empty room. I
Oh,
want people to
definitely
read
not.
it. I think there are people who need to read it. A lot of people
Yeah.
who will never read this book are
No,
people
never.
who really need to read it because I
Mm,
think they'd like it. And I think it would make them think about their world a little bit differently. And I think that's what scares them.
mhm.
And I get that, I totally understand that. But I hope that, they'll turn around and pick it up one day and realize that, like I said, we're not all that different.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Is there anything else that you would like to add, sir? What have you got going on for the foreseeable future?
Right now, I hope people are, it seems like people are really loving Masters of the Universe Revolution on Netflix, which
Hmm.
is the second season of our series. The first season was called Revelation,
Revelation.
that I've done with Kevin Smith. But I'm working on the prequel comic book to Revolution, for Dark Horse. That is available for pre-order now. 4 issues, beginning May 15th. 2024. So yeah, that's please get out there, pre-order that book, learn a little bit more about Hordak and Skeletor. I behind the scenes I call it, when Hordak met Skeletor.
There you go.
But yeah, so that's a lot of fun, and so hopefully people are excited about that. A lot of people have, like I said, love the show, so I think they'll be delighted by what we're doing with the comic book.
Excellent, excellent. Well, you know what? The show is great. Alan Scott, the Green Lantern, like I said, 1 through 4 is available now. Issues 5 and 6 are set to come out in March. It's a beautiful book. I personally want to see it in as many hands as possible. But thank you, Tim Sheridan, for being here, and thank you for writing this book.
Rob, thank you for having me, but also I'm just a big fan. I love watching your videos.
Oh,
And so I
oh,
love the way
geez.
I really do. I love the way you approach what you do. And you're a refreshing voice. And I hope that you're going to be around for a long time.
Well, you and me both, bud. Thank you, Mr. Sheridan.